Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining in. The future of local transportation could look, no, in fact, it must look a lot different than today's car and heavy vehicle dominated traffic if we intend to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. The U.S. Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy reports that 64% of trips across all types of transportation involve traveling less than 5 miles. Only 2% of trips reach more than 50 miles. So, local transportation is ripe for reinvention. And my guest today is working to introduce electric vehicles that can replace the car and truck. Bill Klehm is chairman and CEO of eBliss, a maker of electric bikes designed for local, personal, and business use. eBliss products are currently available through Evoke and The Ride. Bill brings hefty transportation credentials to eBliss. He led the launch of Ford's customer service division, developed the Carfax Vehicle History Report, and was CEO of Fallbrook Technologies, which introduced a novel transmission technology for bicycles. He was also the CEO of Ford's Visteon Climate Control division when it was spun out into a separate publicly traded company. Bill and his team launched eBliss in 2022, and its first e-bikes, which feature European Union certified batteries, are available now. eBliss is also developing a comprehensive recycling program that we'll learn more about during the conversation. You can learn more about eBliss at ebliss.global. That's eBliss, ebliss.global. And you can browse their bike offerings at rideevoke.com. Ride Evoke is all one word, no space, no dash. Rideevoke.com. And at theridebikes.com. Also, no spaces, no dash, theridebikes.com. Welcome to the show, Bill. How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Doing great. It's always a pleasure to be talking to somebody who's especially introducing bikes, because I think riding is so much fun and important. But I wanted to start off by, asking, because you come from an automotive and technology background, why are bikes at the forefront of your new venture?
So interesting. So the majority of rides in America in a car are less than 5 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Think about 119 million rides a day happen in the United States. And roughly 64% of them are under 5 miles. 29 million of those are under 2 miles, or under a mile, actually. There's a real opportunity to be able to talk to consumers about their transportation choices, because this is about the choice that people are making to move themselves around. To me, growing up in the car business, I wanted to work for the Ford Motor Company since I was 5 years old, and I got a chance to do that. So I've had a chance to follow my passion several times in my career. And growing up there, I became a student of the industry. And as you watch what happened in automotive, I see the same thing happening in e-mobility. And so rather than sitting on the sidelines and watching it, I felt that it's my duty as a person who knows how to make things happen to be in the middle of it and try and make it happen. Lead by example. It seems relatively weird to me that a 6,000, 7,000 pound vehicle with several hundred horsepower is a choice that people are making 345 times a second to be able to ride a mile. And once that starts to sink into people, I think that rationality will start to define the marketplace. And so again, watching the automotive industry from 1900 to today and watching it evolve, right? In 1900, people wanted a mode of transportation. So demand happened, then policy and infrastructure followed demand. I see the same thing happening in e-mobility around micro-mobility. And so again, I believe those of us who have the capability for leading have the responsibility to do so.
So how do you see the transportation environment changing? Is it that reinforces your confidence in this strategy? Is it the fact that there are more bike lanes? Is it the fact that people are giving up cars? What kind of statistics do you point to say this is why eBliss makes sense?
So, last year there was roughly 800,000 e-bikes sold in America. This year is supposed to be around 1.5 to 1.8 million. So the consumers have decided, I didn't. A lot of times people view the marketplaces through microscopes and not telescopes. So if you look at the lens through a microscope, you think of one specific use case. Where I think of the platform, I think of 1,000 different use cases for transportation. And I think of those options, consumers simply need to know there's an option. Recently, we did an event in Florida in which we had, it's called 150 riders test ride some of our bikes. 75% of them have never been on an e-bike. 100% of them bought one when they got off the bike. So this is an experiential play. And as consumers experience how simple it is to actually move themselves through these modes of transportation, I think that natural evolution is going to happen.
So in addition to the two-wheeled bike, you're looking at other configurations. What are the promising avenues for new vehicle designs that can address both the personal and business uses that we need to take care of?
So I think, as we think about it, the bicycle itself is probably the most ubiquitous form of transportation, and it's the most native, right? It is one unit of energy. The pedals equals 1 unit of energy of the ground. It is the most fundamental drive system in the world for moving humans, besides the legs, and the legs are part of the bike, anyways. So I think the next step up is the reinvention of mobility, starting with the bike and going up. A long time ago, a very senior guy at a very large automaker, I won't name them, and he was the head of technology for that automaker. And he told me, as I was starting my transmission business, that the world needs to think about redeveloping drive systems and transportation from the bicycle up, because it's very difficult to take an automotive and decontent it down to make it affordable and functional. You have to rethink all of those things. I think I know the same thing is happening today in mobility. If you look around the world and you see the innovation that's happening around mobility, New York City is a classic example. So you see all these, what I call Frankenstein e-bikes running around New York City that are cobbled together e-bikes. And it's because the makers haven't thought about the modes of transportation and the usable cases, I call them use cases for transportation solutions. Similar to when I grew up in Detroit in the 70s, right? We all mechanically messed with our vehicles, right? Well, the same is now happening in e-bikes. Whenever you see that kind of innovation based at the consumer level, you know that capital is going to follow to find use cases to be able to deliver vehicles that make sense. Another great example is roughly in the early 70s, let's call it 40 to 50% of the cars didn't even come with air conditioning. By the 80s, it was 99%. So that evolution happened that quickly, right? It took 10 years. Today, that evolution happens much faster because the communication modules that are out there and the ability to get the message out is instant, right? People think word of mouth is the most powerful way to communicate things. Social media is word of mouth that's organized. So I think all of that stuff is bringing Moore's law into this market. And so back to your original question, it's going to drive the adoption and the creation of new forms of transportation. Quite frankly, haven't been necessarily put on paper yet, but that innovation cycle is happening around the world. I think I've been invited to no fewer than 30 conferences around the world on micromobility. They're happening everywhere. And again, when that groundswell of entrepreneurship hits the marketplace, those lanes start to be developed and vehicles come out of those lanes. Go ahead.
Well, what I'm thinking of is the various configurations that might serve me as an older person, for instance. 3 wheels, 4 wheels, cart-like vehicles. You're describing something where we're outside using these things all year round, potentially. And that is a question that I've often heard from our readers when they talk about e-bikes. Can I ride this year round? How do we design so that we have a light electric vehicle that is fitted for our personal or our business needs that'll work all year long?
It's funny. I smile because, growing up inside of an automaker and having amazing training that I had to all these jobs I had, and it was just so much fun to watch vehicles get thought of and developed. That same discipline is coming into this space, right? Because the technology to design and build vehicles is now relatively ubiquitous. When I grew up inside of Ford, you would have, in 1985, 1990, you'd have never thought that a car company could, come out of nowhere. Car companies are everywhere because the technology capability of the system to design things has now risen. So now so many more places to be able to get things built. So that innovation cycle is happening faster and faster. 3-wheel, 4-wheel, tilt steering vehicles, cargo vehicles, all of these vehicles, I think, are all coming. I think it's going to be, so let me come back to my other statement. We think about the world through a microscope because those are our parameters that we view the world in, experiences. But what we really need to be thinking about is the breadth of applications that a vehicle could be used in, and then designing for those applications. So as I think about those designs, I think about modularity. I think about, to your question, an older person who doesn't want the risk of having on 2 wheels and tipping over, wants to have a 3 and 4-wheel vehicle. Well, how can we create those in a modular environment where those same tools and equipment can be used for multiple applications? Because if you can do that, you can drive down the cost and drive up the functional performance. And so as a result, you get a better vehicle. The other thing is, you're thinking about it. So there's an interesting company out of Switzerland that used to be, I think, part of BMW years ago, and they make a very small 4-wheel little electric vehicle that I can't remember the name of it, that the front window opens up and that's how you get into the vehicle.
I remember seeing this.
Remember? So now all of a sudden becoming super popular, right? And to your point, customers want to have that local commute, but the weather is not so great in Switzerland or in northern Germany or whatever. Can we get an enclosure to put around that quote unquote bicycle? That's exactly the point of what I think these design platforms become. What eBliss wants to do is to take those use cases and find those intelligent channels to the market and design vehicles for those use cases that consumers want to have.
So one of the big drivers of transitions in vehicles generally are delivery companies who are looking for lower impact options. Are commercial delivery companies transitioning to electric and human-powered hybrids?
So a long time ago, I coined a phrase called biohybrid. So think about that for a minute, right? A Toyota Prius, fascinating device, right? Internal combustion engine, electric motor, summed on a planetary gear set. Amazing, right? Magical that Toyota came up with this. Human power instead of an internal combustion engine, electric motor, that becomes a biohybrid. A couple dimensions to this. First, the answer to your question is they're all looking at them. Capital has been raised in Europe, as an example, for companies trying to do software for how to make a decision on what delivery methodology to use for a given environment. And included in those softwares are biohybrid and e-mobility products that we're talking about. So when I see people writing software to define how you're going to deliver something to a home or a business, you know that those people believe that software can be used multiple places, because you don't develop software for one use, right? So the answer to that question is absolutely. I was in Seoul, Korea last October, and I had an opportunity to meet with the mayor's office. 10 million people in Seoul, Korea, huge city. And so as I was meeting with the gentleman, I can't remember his name right now, but we're having dinner, and he said to me that the number one complaint coming out of Koreans bubbling up is the fact that nighttime deliveries are coming on these 2-cycle engines and they're noisy.
Yeah.
Noise pollution is one of those very interesting things that we don't necessarily think about, but it's important that again, consumers want to get around. So I think 100% these cases are going to be made. So some of the vehicles that we're bringing to the market this year are going to have 500, 800 pounds of capacity to be able to tow for 50 or 100 miles. You can very quickly get your head around being able to do that. Back to Manhattan. You go through Manhattan, and if your head's not on a swivel, you may get run over by one of these guys, but you'll also notice they're carrying trailers now.
Yeah.
Now the bike isn't just the bike, it's a mule. So it's carrying things behind it. So those things are happening. Again, when you see that kind of innovation cycle, you can see that kind of capital being deployed into vehicles. The other thing that we see happening is we see financial services aspects coming to the market. We're going to do business leasing. We're in the middle of business leasing and consumer financing for these vehicles. instead of paying $3,000 for a regional e-bike, you pay $150 a month or $30 a month. You offset that with the price of your gasoline, and basically the vehicle becomes almost free. The business case sale to a small business person is almost identical to that, but now it's a mathematical calculation in which you can lease them a vehicle and you can show them a payback.
There's some interesting service models there too. I mean, obviously you could be maintaining the bikes, but could you also potentially deliver the bike and the driver?
So again, I think you're 100% right. I think that is super interesting. This intersection between software and hardware around the services, right, around creating performance. I think there's 100% of that. So you're bringing up these interesting examples of things people are talking about. Again, these are these microscopes people are focused on. So as we start to run down the road, I'm so excited about this because I think there's endless possibilities.
Now, I want you to think back about your experience creating the Carfax vehicle report, because there's a need for a lot of new information about sustainability and durability of these vehicles that you need to communicate. What kind of data do you think that EV and bike manufacturers need to communicate to customers? Do they need to tell them the embodied carbon, the use time to reach carbon break even, the social impacts? What do we need to know?
So that's a big question. So Carfax, the Carfax thing started out as I identified as a finance analyst at Ford that Ford Motor Company was paying warranty claims on cars that were salvaged and consumers didn't. And so as a young financial analyst who came out of the field sales organization, honestly, it made me mad. It made me mad that consumers were buying late model used cars that they thought were late model, low mileage used cars, but they were Frankenstein vehicles that were rebuilt in a salvage yard and sold to a consumer. So I was determined to try and find a way to stop that. And I did. And I handed the idea to Stephen Polk and he made Carfax. So that was true story. That was my thing. As I think back on the same thing for e-mobility products and e-bikes, honestly, we're putting serial numbers on all of our bikes. So we're going to serialize our bikes to make a 17 character VIN that means something. And that we want to keep track of those elements with consumers so they understand maintenance needs, what is the history of their vehicle. That will take time to do, but the first thing you have to do as the CEO of the business, is to define that that's important to do. Right. I think us as business owners and senior executives have to think about these things as a 360-degree system from the beginning. So you're on recycling. So I'm a huge fan in so carbon offsets. There's several different dimensions in cycling. One is the fact that you get people out of a vehicle, right? That's a carbon offset. Probably an even bigger carbon offset is to be able to look seriously at the manufacturing processes of the components within there and to think carefully about your component choices. We will create a position on this, and we will come out with some literature and things in the future. I personally believe that, for instance, there's a company in Israel that's coming up with a frame for a bike frame that is carbon neutral, right? Mm-hmm. Those people are starting to market those things to the marketplace, and people are starting to pay attention to them. So as it becomes more important to consumers, that should feed through the manufacturers and drive it. So I think it's just about that 360-degree thinking that's important.
Well, before we take a commercial break, I want to ask you if you could describe how you think the mix of traffic on the streets is going to change over the next decade or two, particularly if this movement is successful. What kinds of vehicles will be on the road, and how will our assumptions about getting around have changed?
So I think there's three things. One is, I think there will be remarkably less cars, so parking in the cities will become much more friendly. So I think. So if you look at, I'm gonna pick an example, and it's an extreme example. Look at Amsterdam, still a city, but there are 1.5 times more bikes than there are cars in Amsterdam, and certainly more than there are people. Yeah. I think people will have more than one electric transportation vehicle. I think if I follow Europe, they've got a trekking bike, they've got a cargo bike, potentially have A commuting bike, so a trekking bike is what they recreate on. A commuting bike is what they go to work on. And a cargo bike is what they go pick up groceries and the kids with. I see that happening. In fact, the bike manufacturers in Europe today are asking themselves, it isn't to sell one bike, it's what's the consumer going to do to buy the second bike. And I think that's very good for where we're going to be. But because of our geography and we're not quite as dense as some of those areas in Europe, I think the makeup of some of those vehicles are going to be different because we're just a different group.
A 3-bike garage. I've never really thought about that, but that's interesting. Let's take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back. Let's get back to the conversation with Bill Klehm. He's the chairman and CEO of electric bike maker eBliss. So, Bill, EV bike batteries have been in the news a lot lately. There's for two reasons. There's concerns about the environmental impact of making all the batteries and all these materials. And then there's the reported threat of fire. So I've got a couple of questions. How does the volume of extraction required to build and operate an electric vehicle compare to making and driving a car?
Oh, goodness. So you're asking a great question. So I think today, well, I know today, so there's a much less of a difference on environmental impact as we sit here today when you take all the round trip efficiencies in. The impact is not as big as people think it is because of the indirect effect of doing all the things that your leading question asked me for. But over time, that's all going to change. So what's changing already is battery chemistry investigation. There are billions of dollars, and I bet you it's tens of billions of dollars going into the next generation of battery chemistry, because supply chain fragility is one thing, where to get lithium, all those things. The stability of lithium as a core element is another thing. So you're seeing people do lithium sulfur. You're seeing a bunch of iron-based assets. You're just seeing a lot of investigation going in there. Hydrogen is coming in there. Biofuels are coming in there. Big arguments in Europe around that. I think all of those things will drive that separation between those fueled vehicles and the electric vehicles. It will take another, what I think of as a generation of vehicles to truly achieve that, but we are on path to do it. The second thing, your question was on the fires. So if you remember back when laptops first came out, same problem, right?
Or phones, the Samsung S7.
So, and those are scary events. Today, if you build a lithium ion battery correctly with a good battery management system, they're very safe, right? You can carry them in your suitcase. They're just fine. It's when people shortcut the systems. So the need for economics overcomes the need for safety and the responsibility of a vehicle manufacturer to provide safe transportation vehicles. And also consumers need to be aware when you're buying a very inexpensive e-bike, when they don't understand the cost of the battery on that e-bike,
right?
70% of the cost of or 60% enterprise wide. So if you just think about that, you don't want to buy a super expensive e-bike and ride it every day. Inexpensive e-bike and ride it every day, because you're going to have those kinds of failures. The laptop industry got together, right? Created standards for those batteries. You never hear about those things happening anymore. But I remember going to a FedEx office with a laptop that I had to FedEx someplace. And I remember the guy telling me, take the battery out. We don't ship battery. So again, I think, and I actually did an interview about this the other day. I think we as manufacturers have a responsibility to stick to standards like UL and CE and those standards that are created out there, because they are very good standards bodies. And if you follow those standards, you will make a good system. The other side of it is sometimes consumers, again, I'm going to go for the inexpensive, or they're struggling to get by and their battery starts to decline, and they research online if they pull cells out and replace them.
Mm-hmm.
Incredibly bad idea to take apart a system that has that kind of material in it and try and do things yourself. Just not a really good idea. I do believe that the battery recycling market is going to come up to speed here very quickly. Batteries are starting to come in. And so you will start to see an outlet for these things to professionally be managed. So again, terrible thing. And I think, again, our responsibility as manufacturers is to make the vehicle and test the vehicle so that we know that these failures aren't going to occur under normal operating circumstances.
Well, new battery technology like solid state in particular is going to eliminate the risk of fire. But how do you expect the range to change over the next 10 years for an e-bike or any of the vehicles that we're talking about because of advances in battery technology?
I think it's, cost per kilowatt hours plummeting, range per kilowatt hours extending. I think all those things, as people also, so part of the thing that happens with a battery, it's how efficient your system is and how efficient you understand how to ride it is. So one of the things that's happening is automatic shifting systems, optimize, hold that motor in its most efficient state. So again, those things are all happening. All that stuff is coming simultaneously. So I see a 20 to 30% improvement in functional range per dollar easily in the next 2 years. I see, I think either one, it's going to be driven by technology. Two, it's going to be driven by the consumers understanding how to do it. Or three, it's just going to be driven by the vehicle itself. But I see significant gains. I've already seen big gains. When I launched my first transmission on an electric bike at the Fietsvaak show in Holland in 2009, 2010, I think, something there, the batteries were extremely expensive, extremely inefficient. And again, the BMSs weren't very well thought of because you didn't have enough intellect, enough time under tension with the system to be able to truly understand how to optimize it. I think that's all changing.
Before we talk about the recycling program, I want to ask about repairability and service. You mentioned that you could lease a bike and you could be taking care of it, but how are you going to build a bike for a consumer that is reliable for decades? Because that's really the key to lowering the overall carbon impact of the manufacturing.
So first and foremost, we take a different approach to design and building a vehicle. We think about it more like an automotive vehicle. So what automotive companies do, and I worked on car programs, one of the things that they do is they spend an enormous amount of money testing and validating and testing to failure. So one of the things we like to do is we want to know how our vehicle is going to fail. So we want to test it to failure, the entire system and the subsystems. I think as people start to do those kinds of things, you will start to see the failure modes start to disappear. So today, failure modes on an e-bike, derailleurs, right? So the little dangler that hangs down. You have 165 Newton meters of torque at the pedals. You add another 165 Newton meters with an electric motor. If that thing comes off just a little bit, it really drives inefficiency in the system. So I think derailleurs are a thing of the past. I think that's one of the things to go. I think the chain is the second thing that's going to be disappearing over time. Nobody wants to have that chain fall off and have a greasy environment when they ride to work, right? Yeah. So, or I think I get to long-term durability on the decades of performance. I think we're at that stage in which the easy stuff needs to just click away. The other one is bringing all the wires interior inside the vehicle rather than having them dangle. Nothing is more fun than be sitting there with your e-bike and having it tangle with your garage and tear out a wire, because intermittent electrical concerns is also one of the major things with e-bikes. I mean, electricity, everybody's freaked out, and they don't know what to do. I think so. As I look at companies like VeloFix, franchises for mobile bike delivery and service, great. I think that's a great concept. I think that's going to be widely adopted and widely used. I think the models for delivering bikes to people at their homes and doing all those things at your house, making it personal, I think is real. If you look at these bikes, there's $600-800 gross at retail for the retailer to be able to have in the vehicle. That's kind of like a small used car that gets sold. Margin in there to provide consumers with the service they want. Back to
I was going to say, but this also dovetails with the question about a recycling program, because recycling doesn't have to happen all at once. It could happen incrementally over time as different parts of the bike are worn out. You've talked about creating a program. Is it going to be closed loop in the sense that you'll be reusing your own materials, or are you simply just trying to capture the materials so they can be processed by somebody else?
I think in the engineering world, it depends, and we'll see. So right now, so when I look at what's happening right now, the first thing that's happening is used bike trade-ins are starting to come up. There's at least 3 in the U.S. are starting to do used bike trade-ins. That's the first step to recycling, is when you start to extend the usable life of the asset that you have, and then end of life events begin to creep in. And as you get there, the economics for this become attractive for entrepreneurs like me to go do something with. I think it's going to be multi-use. Having been in the remanufacturing world a few times in my life, in which we would remanufacture engines, transmissions, steering systems for automotive, same thing absolutely can apply. Our frames are designed to last an awfully long time, so you can certainly hang more components on it and make the next thing about it. I think on the recycling side, the delicate thing on recycling will be recycling batteries. I think that's the most technical aspect, and the one everybody will talk about. But probably the biggest impact will be the rubber goods, will be all those kinds of things, and putting those into an effective recycling campaign. So I think it depends upon where you're talking about the bike and the components therein. So again, I can tell you we're studying it to say which direction do we think we want to go. I think the first thing to do will be to try and create a series of partnerships to create scale early in this. Because again, you reduce risk if you have the right partnership strategy. And I always talk about community. So I think there will be a recycling community. I think repurchase community. I think those things are already naturally occurring, and we want to participate.
It raises an interesting question. You're currently selling bikes through the Ride and Evoke, but what we're talking about here is clearly a multi-channel strategy. How are you rethinking your distribution models in order not only to deliver these bikes, but to recapture various assets along the way so that they could be recycled? Do you anticipate continuing to resell through others, or do you ever go direct?
We think about ourselves as an omni-channel provider. So by the end of this year, our goal is to have 30 different bike models, e-bike models available for sale in the United States. One of the things that we think is important is to try to not sell the same bike through the same channel of distribution. We would like to honor those channels of distribution and provide them with unique options to be able to offer consumers an approach. Go ahead. You have a question?
I hear echoes of the car dealership industry there.
I can tell you I had a business. I had 7,000 car dealers as clients in my life. I have talked to many car dealers who are all telling me that it may be time for them to get into that business, because again, it's really around offering a transportation solution. It's not about a car. How many people who ride in an RV today tow a car behind it and never use the car? Many of those RVs, $500,000, could use a couple folding e-bikes as an option for modes of transportation. Natural ones start to jump at you. So yeah, I think so. For us, we have an omni-channel solution. So we start out. I've got a great partnership with Mike Tomberlin at Tomberlin and the Nordic Group. Fantastic group of guys. Mike and I see eye to eye on this 119 million rides a day and this whole notion of giving consumers an option. So he provides with a low-speed electric vehicle. We're providing him with a unique line of e-bikes so that he can offer his consumers that. Auto dealers are doing the same thing. Many of his dealers are also have auto dealer franchises. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think that's really interesting, because what we're talking about is you might not buy a bike that is a particular brand. You might buy a locally branded bike, which is a completely different way of thinking about this.
So it's interesting. So again, you look at Europe, right? I always look at this study in Europe because I spent so much time launching our products in Europe. Europe started off with local hero brands. So Dodge, Gazella, all these brands, ZEG, all these brands around Germany that were rolled up into these configurations because the local hero brands. So yes, I think there will be some localized brands for sure. I also think there's going to be use case brands.
Mm-hmm.
Cargo and delivery isn't cargo and delivery. I think there's cargo and I think there's utility. So I think there's features and functions you can get. I also believe that use cases are around campuses. So I just want you to think about how many, here in Austin, Apple has a campus, Oracle has a campus. These campuses are sprawling. Being able to offer their constituents and their consumers, employees, the ability to move around like that is rising the bar in which all these rental bikes and City Bike in New York City, all of that has just promoted cycling as a fundamental form of transportation. So I think it's driving adoption.
And so you're also describing an environment where fractional ownership, leasing, sponsored use, all of these things are coexisting in a variety of combinations.
I really do believe that. And I also believe that the innovation cycle, one of the things that happens in large companies, technology companies, is they have a bunch of technology that's stuck in these companies. They don't know how to get it. And I experienced this inside a Ford Motor Company, loved the company, enjoyed the heck out of learning, taught me a ton. But I also saw huge opportunities that they didn't know how to unlock value. I think companies are starting to figure out how to do these kinds of things. I think these incubator models and things also. So I start to see this technology come out. Bosch is a classic example, right? Bosch is a several billion-dollar e-bike business. That is pretty amazing that somebody like Bosch built a several billion-dollar e-bike support business as a Fortune 50 company. So again, I think all those things are happening simultaneously.
And what you're really gesturing at in the long term is we're going to co-design this future. It's not necessarily going to all come from one huge multinational. It's going to come from a combination of local, regional, national, international organizations.
So what I believe is that is our responsibility to design what consumers need. Sometimes they don't know what they need. Sometimes they don't know, but you need to know what they're using it for. Steve Jobs was classic at this. I mean, he just knew what the consumer was going to do with it, how to make the necessary easy. Our responsibility is to know how to do that and design vehicles for that. Today, not being critical, just reality, but to e-bike makers that make what they want, not what the consumer wants. They make what they want.
Yeah.
What we're doing is we're trying to design around use cases and find out from the consumer. We're spending a lot of dollars trying to talk to consumers and find out what do they want. Small aside, I first launched the transmission in my transmission Fallbrook Technologies in Holland. I wanted to do market research. So typical market research is surveys, focus groups, whatever. We did something completely different. We sat down with over 1,000 families. We sat in their living room and we asked them, what do you want?
Mm-hmm.
What they told us was they want a high quality seat because they ride 18 kilometers to and from work and they want a high quality seat. They wanted a quiet drivetrain because they wanted to enjoy, and they wanted something that was maintenance free and they didn't have to worry about it. Those were their top three things. So as we launched our technology, it was completely silent. It is incredibly durable, right? And I couldn't do anything about the seat. So if the bike maker made a good seat, I could cover the other two. But what I found is that it's a different way to talk to to find out from a consumer. I don't think I would have gotten that bright line, that signal through the smoke, if I hadn't sat in the living room. And I probably did 50 of these myself, but the team did 1,000 of them. Across Holland, right? To be able to talk to consumers about, tell me what you want, and then ask them questions. What does your family do with your bike? Tell me how you ride to work. What is it about? Tell me what the touch points are. Those are things very, very important. And as we think about the bike, the quality of the event also is what consumers touch and feel. That's how they quality as one of their judgments of quality. So those are things that we try and do today.
So, Bill, you mentioned that you're aiming to do 30 different models this year. How can folks follow along with what eBliss is doing and keep up on it?
So one, obviously our website, www.ebliss.global. So please, follow along on the news. Two, I'm going to be doing a lot of these events and talking to people like yourself, because I think as a leader, I think it's up to us to take a leadership position, to be noisy, to be provocative, and to push the edge of the envelope, because that's how the envelope moves. So you will hear and see us everywhere. That's our goal. And wherever we be, we want to be powerful, we want to be responsible, and we want to be respectful.
Well, welcome to the fray. Thank you very much for spending time with us today.
Thank you very much. It was an amazing time. So appreciate you.
We've been speaking with Bill Klehm. He's the chairman and CEO of electric bike maker eBliss. And you can learn more about eBliss at ebliss.global. eBliss is ebliss.global. Humans tend to think of their present as a relatively inflexible reality, and automotive and truck traffic has come to feel inevitable after 100 years of growth. But when we talk about being stuck in crowded cities and at congested intersections, there is a genuine opportunity to transform today's reality into a better, more efficient, and environmentally responsible future. Bill's description of co-designing new products with consumers and manufacturing, distribution, and service partners is an important break in the transportation conversation. Too often, we've been presented with only a few options instead of the choice to reconfigure a technology to our specific needs. And with the advent of distributed real-time manufacturing, such as with 3D printing and catalogs of standards-based compatible components, we'll probably see 2, 3, 4, and more wheeled options for every type of transportation over the next few years. I'm intrigued in particular by the idea of the 3-bike garage. It'll take a lot less room than parking 3 cars, and it'll be better for the planet while making vehicle use a personalized pleasure. One bike for going on the trails, one bike for going to work, another one for shopping and larger loads that you want to carry around. But all of this will work only if we can reduce the overall environmental impact of the internal combustion engine by removing those vehicles from the road. So watch the electric bike and cart space. There's a revolution brewing. And you can start your own revolution by sharing this podcast or any of the more than 380 other interviews on sustainability in your ear. I hope you'll take a moment to share this podcast with your friends by writing a review on your favorite platform. You folks are the amplifiers that spread more ideas so we can create less waste. So please tell your friends, families, and coworkers that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or any of the other fine purveyors of podcast goodness out there. Thank you very much for your support. And thank you for spending time with us today. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911, and we'll be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.